Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. And on these weekly mini episodes, we bring you bite-sized ideas for you to snack on.
Like breathing exercises, book reviews. Maybe we'll review some scientific research, or we'll share some wellness and fertility stories from our listeners.
So if you're looking for a tip or a trick related to your fertility and well-being, then you've come to the right place.
Let's dig in.
Well, welcome back to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ann Judge.
And I'm Ruby Boris.
And we hope you listened to our full episode on Thursday. In keeping with our usual food theme, this is our snack episode, and we are so thrilled to welcome back Dr. B. If you did not listen to his full episode, please do so, because it's a great overview for kind of all things fiber and gut health, and why this is such an important topic for Ruby, but also she's getting me on board with wanting to change things too. And for our short snack, we wanted to delve a little bit more into hormones. I know a lot of our listeners were really interested in that fertility piece. So thank you for spending a little bit more time with us, and welcome back, Dr. B.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It is a meeting of our two worlds because everything is so connected, as we talked about in the first episode. So the gut, surprisingly, has a lot to do with hormones.
Yeah, it does. It's an interesting thing because, going back to the first episode, these microbes, they're not even part of our body and they're not human. And yet they are intertwined with our hormonal balance in a way that we should appropriately describe the gut microbiome as an endocrine organ because they're part of the story.
I tell my patients, I'm like, you think you only have one brain, but you actually have two, and one's in your gut.
They do call it the second brain, and they also will call it the enteric nervous system because your gut has the second most nerves in your body. So like the number one place for nerves is literally your brain, but then your gut is number two. You have 5 times more nerves in your gut than you do in your spinal cord. The gut is actually capable of regulating itself. So for example, regardless of what's going on with your brain, your gut will work, and it has the ability to basically digest your food and metabolize it. But that doesn't mean that your brain and your gut are separate. It's like in the first episode, we talked about how your gut is so connected to your digestion or to your immune system. And now here we are, and like there's these other connections that exist where we can't really disentangle and separate them because they're really, intertwined. And that is your gut and your hormones, or your gut and your mood and your brain health.
Well, one of the things that I thought was fascinating is just how quickly all this is advancing and how much more we're learning. I feel like that's one of the things that we talk about in infertility a lot too, that it can be so frustrating when people are diagnosed with quote unquote unexplained infertility. And a lot of it we're having to explain. It doesn't mean there's not something going on. It just may not be something that we completely can test for or understand in this moment. And so we're always trying to just work with the information we have and maximize the quality of whatever we have, what we're working with. And so, I feel like this whole idea of understanding the gut and especially microbiome, both in terms of the vaginal microbiome, is something that fertility realm is really kind of getting into over the last 5 years because it's an area that we haven't looked at before, and it impacts so many aspects of our health and function that it certainly makes sense that this is also going to play a role in reproduction.
There's so much that we don't know about the way that the body works. If we're talking about the gut microbes specifically, if you go back to like roughly 2005, we actually did not have the technology to really study them. And it wasn't until roughly 2006 that we started to develop this technology. And the other thing that happened is our computers caught up because there's so much information in a bowel movement that we actually needed supercomputers in order to handle it. And this is the evolution of medicine. But I do sincerely believe that, like, first of all, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much that we're going to learn. I also think that so far what we know about the connections between the gut and our hormones, or our gut and fertility, we're just getting started.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, we used to think that the uterus was just like a vessel, right? And now we've realized that there's actually this like embryo uterus connection and has its own microbiome. And there's more signaling happening than we actually even realize. And it's both really cool, but also kind of frustrating when you're trying to tell patients like, well, I don't know why your uterine lining isn't getting thicker, or you're having all these things, because we're still at the very beginning.
What's exciting is that there's so much opportunity for us to learn more. And I think it's going to happen. And it's just a matter of time that we're investing into answering these questions. I mean, you have to understand, like, just because you can ask the question doesn't mean that we can get the study done that quickly, right? There's effort and there's finances and there's other elements that sort of slow us down and force us to go step by step, one thing at a time. But I really think that we're living in a scientific revolution. This is changing the way that we're going to look at biology and human health. And again, it's quite fascinating and exciting to ponder the possibility that it's not even human.
And what do we know so far? In the main episode, I know you tossed out briefly PCOS and endometriosis. Like, what research do we have about the role that gut health can play into some common fertility conditions?
We know that if you take a look at the gut microbiome in people that have these types of conditions, that would include polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis, endometrial hyperplasia, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. In each of these cases, you're going to find that there's disturbance of the gut microbiome. It's extremely common, by the way, to see people that have these conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome or endometriosis and see them also simultaneously having digestive health problems.
Yeah, very common.
Almost ubiquitous. Yeah. And it's quite fascinating to consider. So, there's this question, like, there's at least an association. Is it causation between this connection between the changes in the microbiome and the changes that are taking place in these hormonally motivated health conditions? Well, it turns out that if you, for example, take a look at fiber intake. In the first podcast, I mentioned that fiber has been shown to reduce our risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and Alzheimer's. Under the umbrella of cancer, they have actually found that dietary fiber reduces a woman's likelihood of being diagnosed with breast cancer. The reason why, again, I believe comes back to the microbiome and short-chain fatty acids. Existing within the microbiome is something that scientists have termed the estrobolome. And the estrobolome is a reference to estrogen and estrogen balance or estrogen metabolism. Because estrogen is not quite simply this thing that gets pumped out by the ovaries and that's the end of the story. There is sort of a cycle that estrogen goes through. And living inside of the microbiome are specific microbes, part of this estrobolome, that contain an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. And this beta-glucuronidase is actually an integral part of estrogen metabolism and estrogen balance in the body. So when the gut microbiome is out of balance, then it stands to reason that specific changes in the gut microbiome could actually elevate estrogen levels. When we elevate estrogen levels, we are increasing our exposure to estrogen-related health conditions like mentioned earlier, endometriosis, endometrial hyperplasia, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, right? Like estrogen is sort of the critical piece here. But on the flip side, you could also alter estrogen balance in the other direction, reducing estrogen levels. That could potentially affect female fertility. Or another possibility is polycystic ovary syndrome. Now, polycystic ovary syndrome is not a deficiency of estrogen per se, but polycystic ovary syndrome is an imbalance in the hormones that include potentially estrogen and also androgenic hormones. Androgenic hormones are traditionally referred to as male sex hormones, and that's just kind of us simplifying it to say men have more of these hormones. Like I have estrogen in my body, right? So we call it a female sex hormone, but that's because people who are born as women, they have more estrogen in their body. Well, the gut microbiome actually turns out to be relevant for androgen hormones. There's a specific bacteria called Clostridium scindens that has been associated with androgen balance. And this could potentially explain how the gut microbiome is connected to polycystic ovary syndrome and simultaneously could explain ways in which, like, by the way, just to be clear for everyone, I'm not claiming this is the only thing relevant to these conditions.
Yeah, we fixed it.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
What I am saying, though, is that this is part of the story.
Infertility patients will do anything. I mean, that's why you're trying so hard. We see people who will go on a bag full of supplements if they think it might do anything. But, this idea of looking at nutrition is still a little bit of a harder sell. And it's sad because I think a lot of it is that you just don't have the same marketing behind Whole Foods as you do if someone came up with the magic pill to fix your microbiome.
we just have to be kind of very honest with the reality, which is that change is not easy. And most of us are eating the diet that we eat because we actually like it.
Yeah.
Like we're not kicking and screaming and doing it against our will. And asking someone to make that change is actually a little bit of kicking and screaming against their will, potentially. They have to actually make the choice consciously and find the motivation to move to something different, which is a risk and it's a little bit scary. As opposed to, I think that, modern medicine has made it very clear, popping pills is easy. The problem is like you can't supplement or medicate your way from a C- gut to an A+. It's just not possible. If you want to move your gut from a C- to an A+, it has to start with diet and lifestyle to get yourself to an A- or an A. And then maybe that's where the supplements kick in to get you that like little last boost.
And also, I like in the main episode, you talk about the fact that there is fast turnover and that you don't have to be perfect. So yeah, you can still get an A even if you fail one quiz. I find it a lot more approachable after listening to your main episode. The idea that it's not one giant choice, it's a bunch of these little choices that every time you're hungry, and part of that is also listening for your actual hunger cues and kind of breaking the patterns that we've grown up with, making that choice of what you want to fuel your body and feed your microbiome. I definitely feel much more protective of what I'm going to feed my microbiome now.
What worked for me, at least, is to focus on the excitement that comes from knowing that I am nourishing my body and the feeling that I deserve that, right?
Yeah.
It feels good to take care of yourself and knowing you're doing the right thing for your body. It feels really good.
But at the same time, not allowing that idea to get away from you to the point that you are becoming obsessive about it. Like, I like ice cream. I may eat non-dairy ice cream, but that doesn't mean it's healthy. I'm not pretending that it is. I do it because I enjoy it. And that's okay, right? And so I kind of feel like this idea of progress over perfection, I celebrate all progress because at the end of the day, we're all on a journey and we're just at different points. And if you could take where you are today and take one step in the right direction, that's a win. And we should accept it as that.
I really liked how you described like big picture goal, and certainly you don't have to go from where you are now to this, right? But progress, not perfection, but big picture goal of 90% plant-based, kind of that blue zone kind of approach with 10% flex account, where you can just kind of spend that on the other things that you enjoy that might not fall into that category.
I think there's many versions of a healthful diet. I am not here to say that the only version of a healthful diet is a completely plant-based diet. My message is that the average American, their diet is 10% plants. By the way, potatoes from French fries are number one. 10% plants, 30% animal products, which I can tell you what the fiber content of that is. It's 0. And 60% ultra-processed foods, which generally are devoid of fiber. And there's a lot of other questions that exist around those foods. I'm here to say not that you need to be this or you need to be that. I'm here to say that I truly believe that if you are the average American, by the way, I was probably 5% plant-based. If you go back to my story from the first episode, which we talked about for at least an hour and a half, I was like 5% plant-based for most of my adult life and had 0 interest in eating plants. And it was not an ethical motivation that brought me here. It was my health. If you start to make changes, I think that you're going to find and have an experience similar to me, which is that you're going to love the way that you feel. And then you're going to want more. And that's going to drive you over the course of time from 10% to 25% to 45% to 65%. And you start getting north of 70% plants. And you're in an awesome place. But you're also going to want more. And as a quick example, I would describe it as pescatarian, mostly vegetarian, but occasional fish. And I was actually that way for several years. And I felt definitely a lot better. And I, by the way, lost about 35 pounds by changing my diet. But I was curious, is there a higher level? And I decided to go for it. This was a few years ago. And I changed my diet and I actually eliminated the dairy and the eggs, which, by the way, were like a huge part of what I was eating, and eliminated the fish. And I lost another 15 pounds. And I got to, for the first time in my late 30s, I was back at my high school weight, but actually much more fit.
Wasn't that the Ted Lasso quote? Like, you want to be curious, not judgmental, just be curious. Be curious about your body and what might happen with changes and kind of go from there. And I love how you mentioned it coming from this place of taking care of yourself, because that's what infertility patients need. Like, you're not thinking about these changes as another way to punish your body for not giving you the outcome that you thought you wanted. It's just one more way to take care of yourself and see if it makes you feel better as you go through this journey.
Yeah, there's too much shame and blame in the fertility. Unfortunately, still, we don't need to be adding more shame and blame on top of it.
I think it's really hard. I feel for people who struggle with these types of issues. Studies have suggested that this can be as emotionally challenging as a cancer diagnosis. For many people, they are in this period of time in their life where they've made the decision that they're ready for this to happen. And yet, for whatever reason, it's not happening. That's really stressful. It feels like there's a loss of control. My message is not that I have a magical formula of exactly what to do with your gut in order to restore fertility. My message is that your gut is connected to many parts of your health. And that includes potentially fertility, but it also includes things like your metabolism and your immune system and your mood and your energy levels and your digestion. These things are really important. They're important to your long-term health. They're important to how you feel right now today. And it's for these reasons that my argument is that we should be nurturing a healthy gut microbiome no matter who we are, with or without health-related issues. This is way too important. This is way too relevant to how we feel and whether or not we have long, healthy lives. And so no matter who you are, we should be applying these principles in the interest of wanting to support this part of our health that I think is the most important part.
Did you read my pitch for this podcast? Because I'm pretty sure that was verbatim.
No comment. Nor am I a hacker.
So well said.
I wanted to share this with people, and knowing that people are in a place that they're coming to us for help and they're asking us, like, what can I do? And it's such an opening to talk about these kind of things. And I think you're right. It's like, it's something that all of us can work on.
I think that you, not just you, Ruby, everyone, like the listeners at home, I think you deserve this. Again, it's not just a fertility issue, although I do think that when you rise the tide on your health, it's amazing the effects that it can have on your body in many different ways. Some ways that aren't necessarily intentional, but it happens. I just think that you deserve this. I think that everyone deserves to feel well and to achieve health and also to enjoy their food. So it's finding a way to make all of that possible without having to make the compromises.
That's awesome.
Perfect. And yeah, we will definitely be linking to your cookbook and your books and giving people all these good ideas.
So what's new in research? Just like a brief overview, like what is kind of like out there that might be exciting coming out?
Unrelated to hormones or?
Yeah, anything, just anything.
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts, yeah.
There's so much crazy stuff. We went through a period of time. So you have to understand, so the technology starts to become available in 2006. We mostly were doing like animal model, like mouse studies for basically almost 10 years. Then we started doing human studies. And a lot of it was just, yo, there's a lot here. Holy cow. Like, let's explain what we're seeing. Let's try to understand what's going on. That's kind of where we are. And we're finally starting to move into the phase of manipulation. How do we use what we know to empower healthier humans? And, you know, my message is really about the day-to-day and the small choices that can be so powerful. But there are these moments or examples that are just completely mind-blowing. And so a quick example of this is in cancer care. At MD Anderson, there is a doctor, her name is Jennifer Wargo, and she's studying melanoma. Melanoma, by the way, is the most deadly form of skin cancer. It's very dangerous because if you develop a melanoma, it can very rapidly progress and be like even young people. So part of how they're treating melanoma now is using something called immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is where you actually are empowering a person's own immune system to fight the cancer. And we talked in the first episode about the connection between our gut microbes and our immune system. Previously, they hadn't really entertained the possibility that the gut would be really important to cancer treatment. But they did notice that when people received antibiotics prior to receiving immunotherapy, they didn't do as well. Of course, antibiotics destroy microbes. This sort of raised questions, and it led to a research study where, okay, so what's the opposite of antibiotics? Well, the opposite could be probiotics. When I say probiotics, I don't mean like the stuff that you find at CVS. I mean more like something more powerful, like a fecal transplant. So they did a study giving fecal transplants to these people who were undergoing cancer therapy and discovered profound results. This raised further questions because it's not just probiotics, but instead what we've been talking about between the first podcast and this podcast are really mostly we've been talking about prebiotics. Prebiotics are fiber or resistant starches or polyphenols. So the next question was, well, so how about fiber? What happens? And they did an analysis looking at the outcomes of people and what they were eating and the response to immunotherapy for melanoma. They discovered that fiber created a radical difference in terms of your likelihood of surviving melanoma. In other words, like just an extra 5 grams of fiber could substantially increase your likelihood of surviving this life-threatening cancer. I mean, think about this. We are manipulating both the microbiome and the immune system through things like antibiotics to suppress the microbiome or fecal transplant or fiber to enhance the microbiome. Wow, that's exciting.
It really is this new age of exploration. Ruby and I recently did a book review on the history of the birth control pill, just talking about all the things that were going on in science from the 50s to the 60s. And you sometimes it seems like that was this golden age, like we're going to space, we're understanding hormones, we're doing all these things we've never done before. But you forget things like this are happening now too, like things that we couldn't, as you say, with technology realize before at that microscopic level, the power of computing. Like we really are in this new exploration age at this level that we didn't have any information on. So yeah, this is still a really new and exciting area. And the more we can take what we know and apply it to our own lives now, it'll be so cool to see what happens in the next 10 years.
Totally agree. I cannot wait to see what happens all the time. There is new research coming out that blows my mind. And it's like, this is literally what I've been doing for a living. It's so wild to me that, I mean, it's just like, I don't even know what the boundaries of possibility are, but they're really exciting.
Well, one final question before we wrap up, and it's a really serious one. Have you considered writing a children's book?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's such a good idea. You can make a way more cool Everybody Poops book.
Main character, like a little bug.
That's so funny that you asked that. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm getting up there in years and I'm just like looking back on where I am today and how I got here. And there's these moments that you're like, I had that thought that one time, and maybe that was like a premonition of what my life was going to become. And I don't know who was talking to me in that moment.
It was me.
It was Ruby.
It was me. It was me. See, you hacked my system. I hacked your system.
I'm pretty sure you weren't born yet, but that would be amazing if true. No, but in all seriousness, it's just like I sometimes feel like I was predestined to do this stuff. And I don't know why, but I feel like there's powers that exist within the universe that go beyond what we see and what we feel and all those kinds of things. When I started this journey all the way back, when I made the decision as a teenager that I wanted to go to medical school, I was very idealistic. My thought was, I'm going to be a pediatrician because I love kids. And I really thought like maybe someday I'll write a book for kids. When I was in my 3rd year of medical school, I entered into the hospital again thinking I would be a pediatrician. And I love the kids, but gosh, the parents. Either too much or too little. It's like there's no in between. Why can't we just have in between? Anyway, so I ended up, changing my direction and becoming a gastroenterologist. We don't, by the way, have to go all the way back to my personal story, but
we booked, we have 4 hours to go, so let's do it.
Yeah, we're going to keep going.
But the longer I talk about my personal story, the easier it becomes for me because then you can't grill me with questions that I'm not prepared for. But
oh, I see now. I see where we're going.
It is kind of interesting because it was never my plan or my mission to become an author. It certainly wasn't my plan or my mission to have an Instagram account. I really am not a huge fan, but here I am. This is what it is, and it's changed my life. There are things that I don't like about it, but it's changed my life for the better. It's been great for me and my family. And also it really feels like there's alignment of everything that I dreamed of happening when I was a kid has just come to fruition, but in a very different way than I was expecting. So it's just fascinating to consider that.
But I think that's what I really appreciated about this conversation and your book is you can tell that you're very genuine. You aren't someone that just set out to be an influencer and pulled together some studies and was like, here's the magical fiber cure. Like this is all really coming from a place of knowledge and scientific background. And you can tell how much you believe in this and want to share it with others. Again, I have kids that are 10 and 13 and into the Marvel universe. And I think about like your timelines, right? And sometimes you just feel like you're on this timeline and sometimes it branched off into some direction you didn't expect it to go on, but then you're there and sometimes things still just feel right. And then you maybe weave back to that path you didn't think you'd be on. And for me, that's what infertility was. And I think for a lot of people, it kind of like I had this direction I thought my life was going to go and infertility bumped it off that path. And I wouldn't want it any other way because now I'm here with a job I love and a family I love. And when you're in something that's really hard, it can be hard to visualize the fact that that might actually take you to a place that you feel really fulfilled. And now you'll feel full of fiber and have a great poop, and it'll be really good.
Well, because there's a Marvel universe living inside of us, right?
It's a multiverse inside of us.
It all comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is why we need a diversity of plants to feed our diversity of microbes. They're like our team of Avengers, and every single one of them wants to help us. But like the Avengers would not have one. They would not have one end game if they were missing the Hulk or Captain America. Like we need all of them. So it's all hands on deck for human health.
That dedication to me for the children's book, yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
You've already got it. You've got your Avengers team, and you can name off what was the Archeons. It sounds like an outer space term. So yeah, you've got all the names already for your major characters. Archaea.
Can we convert this from a short episode into a long one? I want to talk about Archaea. They're great.
Yeah. It's totally a Marvel villain name, though. That's like that they're coming down to the spaceship. The Archaea are here.
Yeah, and there are some people who might see them as being bad because they do produce gas. But actually, they're quite good for us. So we need to be a little bit careful with that because our gut can adapt to gas. That's the short answer. Our gut can adapt to gas, but we don't want to necessarily kill the Archaea because they actually protect us from heart disease.
Oh, I guess that's good.
See, it's going to be a children's book series now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. And once again, you can find more information on Dr. B's website, theplantfedgut.com, or on social, theguthealthmd.com, and visit your local indie bookstore, as I always am touting for these books because they're awesome.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.